author really committed to that cannibalism bit. I think this book does have a plot, it's just really bad. You're gonna have a field day with her because she's a fish girl. Do you think the streets of Japan are just littered with katanas? I can't help but feel like there's a non-zero chance that this book would be very well liked by the alt-right manosphere bros. Hi, hello, welcome. I thought it would be kind of fun to reflect on my reading year and talk about what I thought were some of the best and some of the worst books. I'm gonna split this up into two separate videos, and in this one I'm gonna talk about my worst reads. I figured it would be better to just end on a high note. And before we start and get into the list, I thought it would be fun to talk about some very informal statistics about my year. Feel free to skip this section if you're not interested, but if you are, I do have a couple disclaimers. I don't use Goodreads or Storygraph, or I know people use Fable too. I don't track my books in any of those platforms. I actually just use my book journal to jot down my thoughts as I read, and I also have a running list on my notes app that I just add to once I finish a book. So since my tracking method is so loose, I'm gonna categorize each book based on what genre I think it fits best in. So again, please don't expect anything too scientific. Okay, so in 2025, I read a total of 70 books. Unsurprisingly, my most read genre was in fact fantasy/sci-fi with 19 books, which makes a lot of sense because fantasy has been my favorite genre pretty much since I could read. But my second most read genre was actually horror with 16 books, which did surprise me a bit because I've been trying to get more into horror since I want to say maybe 2023, but I still don't really feel like a proper horror reader. Like, I low-key have imposter syndrome. Then I have 8 middle grade books, 7 novellas, 5 historical fiction books, which is kind of huge for me by the way, 3 short stories, then 2 romance, 2 thrillers, 2 lit fic, and 2 non-fiction. Then I have 1 classic. I think it's technically a more modern classic, then 1 all for the game book. I put it as its own category because I like to think of that entire series as being somewhat genre defying, because truly, what are those books? And then finally, I had 2 rereads. That's kind of about it. Those are my very informal statistics. So now, this is where the fun begins. We're gonna talk about some bad books, not to be confused with the bad books. I have 5 books on this list, plus an honorable mention. Normally, this list wouldn't be in any particular order, but for this year, I am actually gonna rank them because the last 2 books I'm gonna mention are truly some of the worst books I've read, possibly ever. So with that, the honorable mention goes to The Starving Saints by Caitlin Starling. This I categorize as one of the horror books, but there are definitely elements of fantasy. So this book takes place in a medieval castle that's been under siege for a hot minute, and inside the castle, the people are running low on all of their resources, but specifically food, until one day they're not. And with the food comes these beings that call themselves saints, and even though they're offering all of these magnificent feasts, there's something not quite right about them. And you basically follow the perspectives of 3 women. One of them is a knight of sorts, another is a servant, and the third one is a nun who might also be a witch. And they're just running around trying to figure out what's going on in the castle with these saints, and they're also trying to save the people inside. I didn't love this book for a few reasons. The main thing is I did not like any of the 3 main characters at all. I just didn't think that there was any chemistry between them. Another thing is I just don't think I'm the type of person who likes books that kind of feel just like a fever dream, and that's pretty much the entirety of this book. Like, you don't know what's real and what's a hallucination. It's also painfully slow. It felt like it took forever for the saints to even show up to the castle, and I was so bored for such a good chunk of the book. That being said, the reason this book is getting an honorable mention is because I think the concept itself was actually very interesting, and there were definitely elements that I thought were actually very good. Like, the saints themselves were very creepy and eerie. Unfortunately, that element was a bit short-lived that I lost interest, so if we stuck with that more, I probably would have liked this book. I also did appreciate the fact that the author really committed to that cannibalism bit, but again, overall, it was just very lacking for me. So that's The Starving Saints. Was it the worst book in the world? No, but the concepts were just very poorly executed, and again, it was boring. With that book out of the way, let's get into the official list. This is where the fun really begins. In 5th place, we have The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern, which is a magical realism fantasy. So what is The Starless Sea about? Well, it's funny you should ask, because that's actually why this book is on this list. I don't know what it's about. After the first few chapters, I had no idea what was going on. By the time I finished this book, the only thing I could tell you is that it follows a guy named Zachary Ezra Rollins. And you want to know why I know that? It's because the author repeats this character's whole ass government name every single time we start a new section. I was like, ma'am,
we get it.
Aside from that though, I did take issue with the actual writing style. It felt like the author just strung together a bunch of words and descriptions that she thought would sound pretty without it actually doing anything. Like, it's just so hollow and it's absolutely exhausting to read. Like, I felt like this book was the writing equivalent of those people that just talk because they like hearing themselves talk. The author clearly loves writing, which is fine. Love that for her. I just don't have to like it. I also just don't like books that are narrated using third-person present tense perspective. I think it's kind of a lingering trauma response from Addie LaRue, which I also hated. I know a lot of people say this book is no plot, all vibes. I personally disagree with that. I think this book does have a plot. It's just really bad and doesn't make much sense. So that's the Starlit Sea. I'm sweating so much and I only talked about 2 books. Anyway, in 4th place, we have Chlorine by Jade Song, which I categorized as a horror book, even though I think it technically is also lit fic. So this book is about a girl who's a competitive swimmer, and to put it very simply, she dreams of becoming a mermaid, and this is kind of her way of coping with things that are happening in her life. Again, that's a very simplified version of the story. As for why this book is on this list, I won't go too into it because this is not the first time I'm talking about how much I don't like this book, but the main gist of it is I thought the main character was insufferable. Like, if you think a not like other girls girl is annoying, wait till you meet this main character. You're gonna have a field day with her because she's a fish girl. But also the discussion of themes and topics that I think the author was trying to explore, they're just so shallow that they did not impact me at all. The writing I also could not take seriously because it's so try hard and it clearly wants to be cutting and super edgy, but it just wasn't. Like, I'm still recovering from this one line. I think it was like, I was meant to be selfish, myself meeting the fish. What does that mean? This quote has actually haunted me since reading this book. It's so bad. I do have a more in-depth review on my channel if you're interested, but this book, just not for me. If you go on Goodreads, the blurb compares it to The Vegetarian by Han Kang, which I finally read, and while I can see the similarities if I squint really hard, I feel like that comparison is just doing both authors a huge disservice. So that's Chlorine. We're getting to the juicy parts. In 3rd place, I have World War Z. I categorize it as horror, but technically it could also be sci-fi because it takes place in a world that's recovering from a zombie apocalypse. And that's basically what the book is about. There's this guy going around the world interviewing different people about, I guess, their experiences during World War Z or the zombie apocalypse. I don't have too much to say on this book, but the main reason it made it onto this list, it's just propaganda. It's thinly veiled propaganda. Okay, upon further consideration, I don't know if I can say that on YouTube, so let me rephrase it. It's propaganda for a country whose prime minister is a war criminal and who the ICC issued an arrest warrant for. Let me explain what I mean by that, because I know it seems a little outlandish, but hear me out. There's a few reasons. First, basically, in the beginning of this book, the first comprehensive report about the zombie outbreak was written by a citizen of this country, and the book also frames this particular country as being the only one in the world to take measures to prepare for this outbreak, and that no one believed them when they're talking about it, which in my opinion was just another way of painting this country as some sort of victim. Yet again, it's like, oh, poor them. They're the only ones doing the right thing and they're being shamed for it. Ooh. The second reason why I think this book is kind of propaganda is because this country, whose prime minister is, again, a war criminal and has an arrest warrant for him, they paint this country as being so kind and so generous for offering a sanctuary of sorts to people, including the group that their current prime minister is committing war crimes against. Aren't you just so generous? No, but seriously, this country is shown to be some sort of benevolent savior figure, and also there's one specific perspective of one particular person who's a part of the group that is the target of this country's war crimes, but they're shown to like regret having initially distrusted this country's offer of protection. Like, what? Oh, babe, you have every right to be distrustful of this sanctuary given your guys' history. Like, what is this? But aside from this book feeling like thinly veiled propaganda for a country who shall not be named, I also felt like this book was kind of racist and played a lot into certain stereotypes. Because like, how did that one Japanese character just happen to find a katana lying around? Do you think the streets of Japan are just littered with katanas? Like, what is this? But aside from the propaganda and the racism, I also didn't like how this book paints the countries that I guess are considered third world countries before the apocalypse as being vengeful for not wanting to support the countries that were considered first world countries before the apocalypse. Like the pre-war third world countries, I'm using quotes, they rightfully call out the first world countries, again using quotes, they call them out for their colonialism and their hypocrisy for only wanting to play nice when they're the ones that are most affected by the zombies. The author frames that as the third world countries being unreasonable. It it made me feel like the author is saying they shouldn't think or feel this way, because how dare they? You know what I mean? Like, we all know that the so-called first world countries would only provide aid if there was just a bunch of strings attached, if the roles were reversed. That whole thing was just kind of wild to me. Maybe this whole thing was just the narrator, but overall this book just did not leave a very good taste in my mouth, which is disappointing because I think the format of this book is actually very interesting. Like, this book, it's basically supposed to be an artifact and a source from this universe. Like, that's so cool to me, but the execution, not great. That's World War Z. Ladies and gentlemen, we are down to our final 2 books. In second place, we have American Psycho. This is a contemporary horror, and I think most people already know what it's about because of the movie, but in case you don't, we basically follow this guy named Patrick Bateman, who is very successful working on Wall Street, and he's a psychopath and also a serial killer. I did not like this book. The writing, I get that in some parts the character is on drugs and his mental state is kind of deteriorating throughout the entire book, so the almost manic style of writing was very much reflective of that. But honestly, you know what it was about this book? It was boring. It was so boring. I will admit that some parts, especially the chapters titled Girls, were genuinely revolting with the gore. Like, it was actually a bit too graphic for me. I don't think I can reread this book. But aside from those sections, it's so dull. That and the commentary was also pretty heavy-handed. Maybe that's just a quality of satire, I don't know. The one nice thing I will say about this book, I can see why people consider it a comedy. There were definitely some moments where I did exhale through my nose. You know when you're like, that was me. It wasn't loud, but it did happen. Overall, I get that this book is satirical, but personally, in the current state of the US with the rise of conservatism and a decline in literacy rates, I can't help but feel like there's a non-zero chance that this book would be very well liked by the alt-right manosphere bros, because they can't pick up on the satire. I don't know if that made sense, but that's American Psycho. And finally, last but certainly not least, the worst book of 2025, in my personal very humble opinion, was Blood Meridian. I hated it. How should I start this? The only thing I knew about this book going into it is that it takes place in the US during a time of westward expansion and that there's a market for the scalps of Native Americans. Based on those 2 things, I thought this book sounded pretty interesting. And technically speaking, that is what I got, but there were a few things. First, I thought the writing was awful to read. Some parts were such a slog to get through, and it just felt so full of itself. And I didn't feel like that kind of pretentious writing added anything stylistically to the story. Like, at least with The Starless Sea, the writing is very much reflective of that more whimsical atmosphere. And again, with American Psycho, it's kind of supposed to show Patrick Bateman's mental state. But with this book, it was so convoluted that half of the time, I don't even know if I understood what the author was even trying to say. Like, I had to whip out the spark notes. And then against that kind of writing, you have some sections that are so laughably stilted. It feels so stiff. And then on top of that, the cherry on top of this awful word ice cream is that the author does not use quotation marks, which is an instant no for me. I promise you, you are not too good for punctuation. I don't care if you think it's a stylistic choice. Don't do it. It's not a good one. It's just pretentious. If I hadn't listened to this book as an audiobook, I don't think I could have gotten through it. The other thing, much like with American Psycho, it's so boring for what it's about. It should have shocked me with how violent it was, but I just thought it was so dull. I didn't care about anything that was happening. Even the judge character, with how awful he is, should have piqued my interest at least a little. But no. Like, how did you manage to make this concept boring? There was just nothing I liked about this book. I don't really like to read Goodreads reviews anymore, but sometimes I will still go on there if I really love or despise the book, and I ended up finding this one review that I think just pretty much sums up all of my thoughts on this book. I'll insert it here. But yeah, not the vibe, not my thing. No. This book also feels like something that the alt-right bros would love. Like, even on Goodreads, under some of the more negative reviews, the comments were like,
"You just didn't understand it."
They're so condescending. It's like, maybe you didn't understand it. That was so aggressive. But yeah, that's Blood Meridian. I don't recommend it. And with that, those were my worst books of 2025. Looking back, I'm realizing that most of these books are horror, so I'm wondering if I actually even like horror, or I just like Andrew Joseph White. To end this video, I know this was kind of negative, but you know what? Sometimes it's fun to talk about books you don't like, because it's kind of cathartic. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for part 2. I promise I'll be a lot more positive.